The rain had been falling for hours, a steady drizzle that turned the streets of Cedarville into slick mirrors reflecting the dim glow of streetlights. Ethan Wallace walked briskly down the nearly empty sidewalk, his coat pulled tight against the chill. He glanced at his phone for what seemed like the 100th time, hesitating before slipping it back into his pocket. The screen had shown the same unread text from Claire. "Where are you? Dinner's getting cold." But he hadn't replied. Something about the evening felt off. The usual hum of traffic was muted, almost non-existent, and the occasional flicker of shadows along alleyways made his stomach tighten. At the office earlier, a phone call had left him tense. His colleagues hadn't noticed anything, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every time he heard a distant siren or the splash of tires on wet asphalt, he jumped slightly, as though someone or something was following him. He arrived at his car, a dark blue sedan parked neatly by the curb, and unlocked it. As he slid into the driver's seat, he hesitated. He wasn't late for work, he was going home, but a strange unease lingered in the pit of his stomach. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was just stress from the day. By 11:15 p.m., he drove off down the empty streets, the windshield wipers slicing rhythmically through the rain. The town of Cedarville was quiet, almost unnaturally so, but the streetlights flickering overhead cast long, distorted shadows across the road. Ethan felt his pulse quicken as he drove past familiar landmarks, the corner bakery, the small park where children played during the day, the bridge over the slow-moving river. Something about the bridge made him glance over his shoulder. The fog rising off the water gave it an eerie, otherworldly appearance. Meanwhile, back at home, Claire waited by the window, watching the headlights sweep past the driveway. She had tried calling him several times, and when he didn't answer, a cold knot of fear began to form in her chest. Ethan was usually punctual, always texting when he was going to be late. Something wasn't right. She picked up the phone again, dialing his number for the umpteenth time, but it went straight to voicemail. By midnight, Claire's anxiety had escalated into panic. She called Ethan's office, but the receptionist hadn't seen him leave. "He left on time," she said cautiously, her voice tinged with worry. "I don't know where he could be." Claire's hands trembled as she hung up the phone, her mind racing through every possible scenario, from car trouble to something far worse. The next morning, Detective Mark Reynolds arrived at the Wallace residence. Reynolds was in his late 40s, experienced and methodical, with a calm demeanor that often belied the intensity of his work. As he stepped into the house, he noted the small details. The dog, a golden retriever named Max, pacing anxiously near the door, Ethan's briefcase still on the counter, untouched, and the kitchen table littered with unread newspapers. Reynolds knelt to examine the remnants of Ethan's morning routine, a half-drunk cup of coffee, the toast crumbs still on the plate. Nothing had been disturbed, which made the absence even more peculiar. As he moved to Ethan's study, he noticed a crumpled note on the desk. Picking it up carefully, he read the partial message, "If anything happens." The paper was torn, the warning unfinished. Reynolds felt a cold chill run down his spine. Whoever had written this note, or whoever it was intended for, had anticipated danger. Outside, neighbors had started gathering, whispering nervously among themselves. Cedarville was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, and a disappearance like this was rare, almost unheard of. Rumors spread quickly. Some suggested Ethan had simply run off. Others whispered about foul play. Claire stepped out onto the porch, trying to reassure the neighbors, but her voice was shaky, betraying her own growing fear. Reynolds began his investigation by retracing Ethan's last known movements. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station revealed Ethan arriving around 11 p.m., purchasing a bottle of water and briefly glancing around as if expecting someone. Then a figure approached, a man in a dark hoodie. Ethan's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of unease crossing his face. The two exchanged words too quickly to hear, and then the footage cut abruptly, leaving the man's identity unknown. As Reynolds reviewed the footage, he made a call to the local patrol units, instructing them to check the surrounding areas, including the bridge over the river. Something about the footage didn't sit right. The interaction was brief, almost casual, but the timing was suspicious. It was the last time anyone had seen Ethan before he vanished into the night. Hours turned into a day, and still there was no sign of Ethan. The search expanded, volunteers combing the streets and wooded areas, police officers checking hospitals, stations, and shelters. Claire stayed close to Reynolds, answering questions and providing every detail she could remember, though her mind kept circling back to the unanswered note. What had Ethan been trying to warn her about? By evening, the town's anxiety had grown into fear. A news crew arrived, cameras rolling as reporters interviewed neighbors and friends. "It's so unlike Ethan," one colleague said, her voice trembling. "He's reliable, cautious. I just can't understand where he'd go without telling anyone." Reynolds stayed late into the night, reviewing files and reports, trying to piece together the puzzle. Each small clue raised more questions than answers, and just as he was about to leave for the night, he noticed something out of place on the security monitor, movement near the river, a shadowy figure briefly crossing the frame before vanishing into the darkness. His gut told him that Ethan's disappearance was not a random event. Someone had been waiting, watching, and the real story had only just begun. As the rain continued to fall over Cedarville, Ethan remained missing. The streets were quiet, the river ran cold and dark, and the town slept uneasily, unaware that the mystery was about to deepen in ways no one could have imagined. Cliffhanger. Late that night, a car engine roared briefly near the river bridge, echoing through the fog. A hooded figure watched from the shadows, and for a fleeting moment it seemed almost like Ethan was inside the car. But then the headlights vanished, leaving only the sound of water lapping against the riverbank. The morning fog hung low over Cedarville, casting the river in a gray, ghostly light. The town was waking slowly, but the usual calm was shattered when a fisherman, casting his line near the old willow bridge, noticed something strange in the water. Half submerged, glinting faintly in the mist, was a car. Its roof was barely visible above the river's surface, and the water lapped gently against its windows. By the time Detective Mark Reynolds arrived, the riverbank was lined with uniformed officers, yellow crime scene tape flapping weakly in the breeze. Divers prepared their gear, the dull clang of metal and the hiss of oxygen tanks filling the air. Reynolds squinted at the car through the fog. It was Ethan's sedan, unmistakable even in the murky water. The license plates, the distinctive scratches along the driver's side, every detail matched. Yet the car was empty. Claire arrived soon after, escorted by an officer. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Ethan, he's inside, isn't he?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reynolds shook his head gently. "Not this time, but we're going to find out what happened." Divers entered the frigid water, the river cold and unwelcoming. Minutes felt like hours as they searched the interior. The car doors were locked, windows intact, no sign of struggle, no indication of Ethan's presence. Inside, personal belongings remained untouched, his wallet, his phone, his briefcase. But in the glove compartment, something unusual caught Reynolds' eye, an unmarked, slightly damp envelope with a cryptic symbol stamped on the corner, unlike anything he had seen before. He held it carefully, slipping it into an evidence bag. "Who would leave this here?" he murmured to himself, "and why?" Meanwhile, Claire received a text message on her phone. The notification made her start. She opened it, her hands trembling. The message read, "Stop asking questions. They're watching. If you care about him, stay silent." Her heart raced. She turned to Reynolds, holding the phone like a lifeline. "Do you think it's them, the people Ethan was investigating?" Reynolds nodded grimly. "That's exactly what I'm starting to think. Whoever is behind this is dangerous, organized, and they know what Ethan knows." The town's mood shifted immediately. Friends, neighbors, and local news crews gathered along the riverbank, whispering theories and speculations. Every movement in the fog seemed sinister. The local police began canvassing nearby streets and alleys, searching for any clues the hooded man from the gas station footage might have left behind. Reynolds requested surveillance footage from every camera along Ethan's usual routes. At a gas station near the edge of town, one clip confirmed their suspicions. Ethan had stopped briefly, bought a bottle of water, and walked toward his car. Moments later, a man in a dark hoodie approached him. The conversation was brief, tense, and nearly inaudible. Ethan's posture stiffened, and for a split second he glanced around nervously. The man's face remained hidden in shadow. Then, as Ethan returned to his car, the footage cut off, leaving the encounter shrouded in mystery. Reynolds felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Ethan's disappearance was no accident. This was deliberate, calculated, and the presence of the envelope hinted at something far deeper. He opened the glove compartment again, inspecting the damp paper carefully. There were no words, only the strange symbol, a circle with a line slicing through it horizontally, surrounded by tiny, unrecognizable marks. Reynolds had no immediate explanation, but instinct told him it was significant. Hours passed, and the river was finally cleared of divers and equipment. Forensics teams examined the car, taking photographs, swabbing surfaces, and noting everything meticulously. There were no fingerprints aside from Ethan's, no signs of forced entry, no trace of another person. The car had ended up in the river, but the mystery of how it got there and why Ethan wasn't inside remained unsolved. Later that afternoon, Reynolds and his team interviewed the residents near the bridge. A local bartender provided a breakthrough. "I saw something odd that night," he said, leaning forward, voice low. "Around 11, a black van stopped near the river. I thought maybe someone was fishing, but then a man was shoved inside. Couldn't see his face, it was dark, but it didn't look like he went willingly." Reynolds scribbled notes furiously. The description matched the time Ethan disappeared. The plot was thickening. Someone had abducted him after a brief encounter at the gas station. The river and the car were part of an elaborate scheme to mislead anyone looking for him. As the sun set behind the misty horizon, Reynolds returned to the Wallace house. Claire was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the television. Another text arrived, more ominous than the last. "Curiosity kills. Stop digging or he'll pay the price." Claire's hands shook as she showed the message to Reynolds.
He read it carefully, his jaw tightening. "They're sending a message," he said quietly. "Whoever did this doesn't want us digging, but we're not stopping. We find Ethan, or we find out why they took him." Meanwhile, deeper investigation into Ethan's recent life began to reveal secrets. Financial records indicated unusual cash withdrawals in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. Encrypted emails with unknown addresses suggested he'd been corresponding with someone in secret. These clues hinted at more than a missing person case. It suggested Ethan had stumbled onto something dangerous, something someone wanted remain hidden. Late that night, Reynolds reviewed surveillance footage once more. Something small caught his eye, a shadow flickering near the riverbank just as the black van disappeared from the bartender's view. It moved with unnatural speed, almost like it knew where to go before anyone else. The feeling of being watched, the same that Ethan had felt days earlier, now settled on Reynolds. Whoever had taken Ethan was meticulous, and their plan extended far beyond a simple disappearance. By midnight, Cedarville was silent again, but unease hung like a heavy fog. Claire stayed awake, listening for the faintest sound, fearing it could be Ethan or it could be something worse. Reynolds sat in his car, staring at the river under the dim streetlights, replaying every moment of the case in his mind. The envelope, the hooded figure, the black van, all pieces of a puzzle that didn't make sense. Cliffhanger. As Reynolds turned to leave, his phone buzzed. A tip had come in, anonymous, claiming to know Ethan's location. The message contained only coordinates and one chilling line. "If you want him alive, follow the river, but be careful who watches from the shadows." Reynolds' hands tightened on the steering wheel. Somewhere out there, Ethan was alive, but danger was closer than he could imagine, and the mystery of the river, the car, and the hooded figure was only beginning to unravel.
Detective Mark Reynolds had followed the coordinates from the anonymous tip for hours, tracing the twists and turns along Cedarville's fog-choked roads. The night was unnervingly quiet, only the occasional distant howl of a dog or the rustle of leaves in the wind broke the oppressive silence. Somewhere along this lonely stretch of riverbank, Ethan Wallace was alive, or at least Reynolds hoped he was. But the deeper Reynolds dug, the more tangled the web became. Back at the station, his team had uncovered startling details about Ethan's life in the weeks before his disappearance. The accountant, mild-mannered and reserved, had secretly been investigating irregularities at his firm, Harrington & Co., a small but influential financial firm in Cedarville. Large sums of money had been quietly funneled through offshore accounts, transactions that didn't make sense on paper. Reynolds' gut told him Ethan had stumbled onto something dangerous, something that powerful people wanted hidden at all costs. Claire, meanwhile, was at home, barely able to sleep. The relentless texts continued, arriving at irregular hours. "Stop asking, or he'll disappear forever. Some secrets are better left buried." Each message sent her into a panic, but she refused to let fear control her. Ethan was out there, somewhere, and she clung to the hope that he would come back. Reynolds returned to the Wallace house later that evening, clutching the envelope from Ethan's car. The symbol inside was strange, almost ritualistic, and he couldn't decipher it immediately. He laid it on the table and studied it under the bright light. "Ethan must have known it was important," he murmured, "but what is it trying to tell us?" The breakthrough came when the lab ran a trace on Ethan's emails and bank statements. Reynolds discovered encrypted messages sent from a private server far removed from Harrington & Co.'s systems. The messages hinted at clandestine meetings, cryptic references to transactions that can't be traced, and veiled warnings about the others.
Whoever Ethan had been communicating with was taking great pains to remain hidden. Reynolds felt a chill run down his spine. This was no ordinary missing person case. Ethan had become a threat to someone, and they had acted quickly to silence him. Late into the night, Reynolds followed another lead from a bartender who remembered seeing Ethan the night he disappeared. "He was being forced into a van," the bartender insisted. "I couldn't see his face, but it was clear he didn't go willingly." Using the tip-off coordinates and surveillance footage, Reynolds traced the van to an abandoned warehouse on the far side of Cedarville. He approached cautiously, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The building was massive, a hulking structure of steel and brick, with rust creeping across the walls. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and stale water. He found nothing at first, just empty crates and broken pallets, but something felt off. Then he saw it, a notebook, soaked and crumpled, lying on the concrete floor. Reynolds picked it up carefully. The pages were damp but legible. Ethan's handwriting sprawled across them in neat, deliberate letters. "If you're reading this, it's already too late. They know I've been investigating Harrington & Co. The transactions, the accounts, the people involved, it goes higher than anyone realizes. I tried to gather proof, but they are watching. If anything happens to me, someone must stop them." The notebook ended abruptly, but it painted a terrifying picture. Ethan had been in over his head. He had discovered a criminal network hiding behind the facade of a legitimate company, and now that network knew they were onto them. Meanwhile, back at the Wallace house, Claire received another message. She read it, trembling. "Curiosity kills. Stop digging or face the consequences." Her hands shook as she dialed Reynolds' number. "Detective, they know we're looking for him. They're threatening me. What do we do?" Reynolds' jaw tightened. "We don't stop. Whoever did this is dangerous, but they've underestimated us. Ethan isn't gone yet, and we'll find him." The following days were a tense blur. Reynolds coordinated surveillance, tracked unusual vehicle movements, and interviewed anyone who might have seen Ethan. Each clue revealed more of the sinister network he had stumbled upon. Emails, bank records, and the notebook indicated that Ethan had been close to uncovering evidence of large-scale money laundering and bribery, something that involved not just his firm, but individuals with influence in the town. At the same time, Reynolds realized the danger extended beyond Ethan. Now Claire was a target too. Every time she left her house, he made sure an officer was nearby. Every text she received was treated as potential evidence. The sense of urgency escalated with each passing day. Then came the breakthrough. A local shopkeeper remembered seeing a black van parked in the industrial district near the river, matching the bartender's earlier account. Using that lead, Reynolds traced the van to a hidden warehouse along the riverbank. Surveillance footage confirmed his suspicions. The van had arrived the night Ethan disappeared, and someone had taken him inside. Reynolds prepared to investigate, knowing he was walking into a dangerous situation. The warehouse was deserted now, but he sensed that it had been a holding place for Ethan and perhaps a trap for anyone who came looking. He searched carefully, and his flashlight revealed damp crates, broken pallets, and shadows that shifted with the flickering light. Then a sound, a faint scuff, like someone moving in the distance. He froze, heart pounding. Whoever had taken Ethan might still be close, watching, waiting. He moved silently, his training taking over. The warehouse seemed endless, every corner and shadow potentially hiding danger. Then, in a far corner, he spotted another notebook, partially soaked. He picked it up. This notebook contained Ethan's final notes. He had discovered that the corruption went far beyond what anyone suspected. Individuals in positions of power were laundering millions, bribing officials, and silencing whistleblowers like him. He had been gathering evidence, preparing to expose the network, but now he was a pawn in a dangerous game. As Reynolds exited the warehouse, the wind carrying the sound of the river, his phone buzzed. A new text appeared on Claire's phone. "You're getting too close. Stop, or he dies." Reynolds' jaw tightened. Ethan's disappearance was no accident. The black van, the threats, the hidden notebooks, all pointed to a chilling truth. Someone extremely dangerous was orchestrating everything, and time was running out. Somewhere in the shadows, Ethan was alive, but each passing hour increased the risk of permanent harm.
The early morning fog clung to the river like a shroud, muffling the sounds of Cedarville. Detective Mark Reynolds drove cautiously along the winding riverbank, flashlight cutting swaths through the mist. The coordinates from the latest tip led him to a remote, dilapidated cabin far from the town's familiar streets. His instincts screamed that Ethan Wallace was close and that danger lay in every shadow. Inside the cabin, the air was thick and oppressive. Rusted tools hung from the walls, and the faint smell of mildew and damp wood pervaded the small space. Reynolds crouched behind a stack of crates, surveying the interior. The creak of floorboards and the distant drip of water were the only sounds. Then he heard it, a faint cough, almost imperceptible. "Ethan," Reynolds whispered, barely moving his lips. A muffled response came from a dark corner. "Detective, over here!" Reynolds approached slowly and found Ethan, pale, gaunt, and chained to a metal frame. His face showed exhaustion, fear, and relief all at once. Reynolds fumbled with his keys, carefully unlocking the chain. Ethan slumped forward, too weak to stand on his own. "You're alive," Reynolds said quietly. "We've got to get you out of here." Ethan nodded, coughing, and handed Reynolds a small, damp envelope. Inside were documents, spreadsheets, and photographs, evidence detailing the syndicate's money laundering, bribery, and intimidation schemes. This is everything," Ethan whispered. "They can't be allowed to get away with it." As they prepared to leave, the sounds of engines and raised voices reached their ears. The criminal network's guards had returned, likely alerted by the van's tracking system. Reynolds drew his weapon, motioning for Ethan to stay low. Shadows flickered across the cabin walls as men in dark clothing approached the entrance. The tension was suffocating. Reynolds knew there was no margin for error. He motioned toward a back exit leading through dense woods. "We move now," he said. Ethan followed, wincing with every step, but determination hardened his features. Outside, the fog obscured vision, giving them a ghostly advantage. Reynolds led Ethan through the underbrush, each step calculated to avoid detection. Behind them, the guards shouted, realizing the captives had escaped. A tense chase ensued, men shouting, boots pounding against the muddy earth. Reynolds and Ethan reached a narrow footbridge over a tributary of the river. Ethan stumbled, nearly falling into the cold water. Reynolds caught him just in time. "Keep going," Reynolds urged. "Almost there." At the riverbank, a waiting vehicle, driven by a trusted colleague, was their only escape. They jumped in, tires spinning against the muddy ground as they raced back toward town. The guards fired sporadically, but the fog and Reynolds' careful navigation allowed them to evade pursuit. Once safe, Reynolds and Ethan delivered the evidence to federal authorities. The documents exposed Harrington and Co.'s criminal activities in full: illegal transactions, offshore accounts, and a system of bribery and intimidation that had silenced whistleblowers for years. Federal agents quickly moved in, raiding offices, freezing assets, and arresting key figures. But not all were caught. Reynolds knew some members of the syndicate had vanished, likely into deeper networks or other towns. The threat was diminished but not completely neutralized, a lingering reminder that vigilance was essential. Back at the Wallace residence, Ethan and Claire embraced, the tension of days spent in fear slowly dissolving into cautious relief. Ethan's eyes reflected exhaustion, but also resolute. "I never imagined it would go this far," he admitted. "But we did it. We have the proof." Claire clutched his hands tightly. "I just want us to be safe," she said softly, "and together." Reynolds, standing nearby, observed the reunion with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. Cases like this never truly ended, he knew. Shadows lingered, and danger had a way of returning when least expected. As night fell, the Wallace home was quiet. Ethan finally rested, but the ordeal had changed him. He was no longer the oblivious accountant who had walked home on a rainy Thursday night. He was a survivor, a man who had confronted corruption and lived to tell the story. Then, just as the family began to breathe a collective sigh of relief, Claire's phone buzzed again. Her heart sank as she read the message. "This isn't over. Watch carefully, or the next warning may be for you." Reynolds noticed her expression and took the phone. "It's likely from someone in the network who escaped. They're sending a message, nothing more. We'll be ready if they make a move." Ethan, still weary but determined, looked out the window at the quiet streets of Cedarville. "We've won a battle, but the war, it's far from over." The camera of the mind's eye lingered on the peaceful suburban home, then slowly drifted back toward the river. The mist swirled, hiding secrets and shadows. Somewhere downstream, a black van waited silently, watching. The mystery was partially solved, but the danger remained, a chilling reminder that the line between safety and peril in Cedarville was thinner than anyone realized. And so the story ended, not with finality, but with vigilance. Ethan was safe for now, the syndicate was exposed, but the fog of uncertainty still lingered. Cedarville would remember the night a man went missing, a car was found in the river, and the secrets of a small town threatened to consume anyone who dared uncover them. The final text to Claire's phone remained on screen, a haunting echo. "This isn't over." And somewhere in the shadows, the story waited for its next chapter.